This week's episode is sponsored by Godox.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. My name is Alan Weitz.
And I'm Jill Waterman.
And our audio engineer, Mike Weinstein, will no doubt be piping in with a question or two along the way. It's been barely a year since our first conversation about AI with German media artist Boris Eldagsen back in September of 2023. And oh, baby, what a year it has been. Our episode with Boris caught the eye of former CNN tech writer Stephen Shankland, who sent us an offer we couldn't refuse to pick his brains about AI back in February. That show resulted in a noteworthy first. In order to keep up to speed with the tsunami of AI advances, we had to invite Stephen back for a follow-up chat while still in the midst of editing our initial recording. You might say we recorded a show and a follow-up for that show in the very same show, if you could follow that logic. But that's what we did. Fast forward to this summer, and just as we were preparing for an epic chat with the renowned Fred Richin, Boris emailed us with the tempting offer to host a discussion between him and multimedia artist Miles Astray. Now, if you've been following the breadcrumbs of this story, both Boris and Miles challenged photography competitions to discuss the differences between photography and AI-generated images. Boris with his AI creation, The Electrician, and Miles with his authentic yet surreal photograph, Flamingone. They're joining us today to debate questions about AI and whether we're adapting or not adapting to the technological shifts that, like it or not, are going on all around us. For those of you who appreciate a short refresher course concerning the backgrounds of today's guests, we offer the following. Boris Eldagsen is an acclaimed media artist, photographer, and AI pioneer based in Berlin. His work in photomedia explores the limits of what can be depicted, using a combination of street photography, staged works, and most recently, both still and video AI image-making tools. He deals intensively with the subconscious, which inspires him to create new worlds of images. Boris has taught creativity, concept development, and photographic art in both Germany and Australia since 2004. Additionally, he's a member of Deutsche Fotografische Academy and is responsible for their online activities. Miles Astray is a multidisciplinary artist who combines writing and photography into art activism. He was inspired by a slow and immersive journey around the world that started in 2012 when he set out to work with grassroots nonprofits for a year. Little did he know that this would be the first step of a new chapter of a reinvented life, living and working with local communities in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. When he returned home for the first time in 2018, he found home was no longer a place to settle. It was just another place to stop along the path of a greater journey. And thus, he's still out there, not so much to find answers, but to keep asking questions. Now, without further ado, let's get this party started. Boris Eldagsen and Miles Astray, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you guys here. The first question, Boris, when we first talked last September, we discussed your AI image of The Electrician, which you entered into the Sony Photography Awards competition. Now, for listeners unfamiliar with the controversy that ensued over Boris's winning the top prize, we'll add a link to the podcast where we discuss that three-ring circus in our show notes. So you can go there, catch up on that if we're losing you in the weeds. Anyway, this June, photographer and writer Miles Astray did the exact opposite. He entered a real photograph called Flamingone into the AI category of the 1839 awards competition. His image won the People's Vote Award and came in third in the overall judging. Once the jury found out it was a quote-unquote real photo rather than simulated, they had a baby, so to speak, and disqualified his entry. But from what we understand, Miles was treated a lot better by the organizers than the reception Boris received. Boris, what do you make of the difference in the attitude? Was it the fact that Miles used a real photograph to make his point about AI? Or do you think it could have been the firestorm created by your situation and the potential of bad press for the contest that caused organizers to have a more positive response to Miles' ruse?
Well, it could be all of it. I don't know. it's pure speculation. But what you have to keep in mind is that the 1839 awards competition is having a lot of categories. The majority is photography. So I think their heart was already beating for photography. And like many other competitions, they started a new category, AI images. And Miles applied and did something wonderful. I was laughing out loud when I was reading about it. And honestly, I have been waiting for some time that somebody just pulls it off. And it's helpful because I think he wanted to make a similar point as I did, but just coming from the opposite side. And here we are, somewhere coming from photography, still doing photography. I'm mostly doing AI generated images, but I think it's still important, even after a year has passed, to educate people, to show the consequences of the new technology, and to be aware that we will not be able to distinguish between generated and authentically photographed images.
I think that's even truer since we recorded our episode and brought up those very same topics. If anything, it's every day we're getting hit by something else that is brand new and mind-boggling and often flawed. But we talk about that as well. One of the things we did was we requested listener questions for today's discussion, and we want to give a big shout out to at Karine Vevano, and we want to just thank her for her feedback. And the question that she and other listeners have to do with Photoshop. And specifically, at what point can or should you no longer consider a photograph, quote unquote, after editing it in Photoshop or similar photo editing software? And who owns a copyright to an AI generated image? Either one of you want to take a shot at that? I mean, I have my own thoughts about it, but I'd be more curious to see what you have to think about it.
Well, Photoshop has been integrating AI image generating for 1.5 years now. And I think because of it, it has been accepted by more and more photographers. You can alter just the little parts of an image, or you can change half of an image, or you generate a complete new image. So it's up for competitions and festivals to decide where is the limit of working with AI software. When is something still a photograph, and when does it start to become something else? And I think the spectrum is on one side, old school authentic photography. You can even go back to old analog techniques. And on the other side, you have purely AI generated images. And in between, you have a lot of hybrid forms where something can start as a photograph, but then is altered with AI and parts are changed, or where something was generated first only with AI, possibly with text, and later you use existing photographs as references to continue to work on that image. That is problematic to draw a line somewhere, but I think that the competitions and festivals that want to show photography, and what is really important here is transparency, to help an audience that looks at winners of a competition or goes to festivals, that they will not be confused. And I think here, I was very disappointed by the Rencontre Festival in Arles in France this summer. It's the most important photo festival in the world. They are not talking about AI-generated images, but silently introduced more than 3 positions into the festival program. And if you didn't read the introductory text until the end, you would possibly be very confused, and you would possibly believe that it is photography. And I think that is a problem that especially festivals need to debate more openly. And I'm waiting for festivals that are willing to put this into the center, to curate whole shows about it, where you can present the strength of photography and show what only photography can do, and you present the strength of AI-generated images and show what only they can do. And right now, it's not happening. Maybe we need to create those shows as well. Yeah.
Boris, what was the subject matter of those image series in RL?
They differed. One was very prominently placed, was documentary about the 60s, about farming in the 60s. And there were even like booklets in the design of the 60s behind glass. So it really looked like it is authentic magazines of the time. And it played with the idea of it's old, it could be. But if you're not familiar with AI-generated images, you will believe that it is photography. And even in their advertisement on their webpage, they had an interview with the artist, and they kept it open there, if it is authentic or not. And for me, that's something that really turns me into a grumpy old man from the Muppet Show. And no, like this year and last year, they only had like one panel talk on this topic of AI, and I was there in the audience, and they were not talking about it. And in the end, when you could ask questions, it was me, the grumpy old Muppet Show guy again, and asking, is it just me that finds it disappointing that a photography festival is showing generated works that look like photography, is not talking about it, doesn't make it transparent, doesn't publish a statement, a position? And I think there's something wrong about it.
I want to make just a little brief point, because again, I've heard this before. At what point is it no longer a real photograph? People look at Photoshop, they go, as soon as you hit like the levels or just any kind of a slight adjustment, it's no longer pure. And I think it's really important to remember that Ansel Adams burned and dodged in the darkroom. And I know at least 3 photographers, real old timers, who would take their 4, 5, and 8x10 negatives, and if the highlights were too dense, they would take a razor and shave away the emulsion a little bit so more light would come through, and use graphite and pencils to change the shadows and highlights on the negatives. That's retouching. It's analog Photoshop. We've been doing this forever. It's nothing new. And also, we have to keep in mind that when we're talking about editing, we have to separate the post-capture editing in like Photoshop and keep it apart from AI-generated editing that your camera and especially smartphones are doing constantly in the background. There's a reason why your iPhone pictures look so darn good, okay? Because, you know, they're juice in the soup.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot with Stephen Shanklin.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to go off of some of the points that Boris made, because I think they're really apt observations and also in line with what you just said. The manipulation of images has always existed since the dawn of photography. The big revolution that photography is a depiction of reality. You can do that with a painting as well. Somebody can sit down for a portrait, and then a painter can accurately capture that to some degree. But photography was a real evolution in that sense, that now you have this verifiable thing that can still be manipulated. Back in the day, that was a big process. You know, you mentioned it, like it's taking a razor blade to something, doing darkroom stuff. Nowadays, it's very different because it's very, very easy to manipulate a picture. AI is the next step in that evolution and the next revolution where the image is generated from scratch. So I agree with Boris that it is a spectrum where at one end you have a pure depiction of reality, and at the other end you have a completely made up picture. And in between you have hybrid forms. To answer that question, where a photo stops being a photo, I think that's a subjective line, especially if we look at photography as an art form. So I think each person has to draw that line, but I think we need to be able to still universally agree on certain things, especially if we're talking about photojournalism. There needs to be that transparency. So for me personally, I do process my pictures. It's impossible not to. My ambition is always to keep the picture as authentic as possible. And if I manipulate it in any way, I'm trying to do so to make it look like that moment. Of course, that is not a perfect approach and it's flawed and it's subjective, but I'm doing it to the best of my recollection. Where it becomes problematic is where we cannot tell anymore whether something is real or not, where it stops being an accurate depiction of reality. That's where I would draw the line.
Fair enough.
Earlier, we mentioned briefly, Miles, your submission, but I want to get from you personally, what was your motivation and what did you hope to achieve with Flamingone?
So, like Boris mentioned earlier, our stunts have a similar message. Part of it is to raise awareness and further the conversation around AI and how indistinguishable AI imagery has become from real photography. And I think that is a conversation we are already having, but I think we need to step on it a little and also turn it into more actionable items in terms of guardrails and whatever is needed to stop the spread of misinformation, which I think is a huge topic. That was part of it. And on the other hand, I wanted to show that there is still merit in human creation, in human interpretation of nature, of the real thing. So that was the point. Like I'd seen a couple of examples, most notably, of course, Boris's example of winning the creative category of the Sony World Photo Awards last year. And there were a few other instances, and those were AI images winning photo competitions. And I thought, why not turn that around and enter a real photo into an AI competition? That was the idea behind it.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely a hurdle to go out into the world and find things that are as fantastical as the stuff that you can get by prompts.
That's right. That is really my credo as well. And like for me, Mother Nature really does it best. That's my personal opinion. As much as I admire what Boris does, that's absolutely incredible. I admire any artist that can create entire worlds and universes from scratch. But for me, my greatest admiration is nature itself, reality itself. And that is what I'm trying to capture with my work as accurately as possible.
I just want to go deep philosophical just for a quick second. You know, Miles, to respond to that comment you made about what you find most interesting is 3.5 billion years of eukaryotic life that we see on planet Earth. Everything that's in the training data sets for the image generators does originate on this planet. And so it's almost inescapable that generated images are going to resemble geology and carbon-based life forms that we see walking around on planet Earth. It was something that I realized a long time ago, but I just sort of started reflecting on that too. You can go as far as you can in your imagination, and you're still going to have images, unless they're totally abstracted in some way, that are versions of the real world.
You know, it's interesting. Like, I mean, I really like the deep dive into Earth's history. It's so true. You know, it's the original data set. That's what it is. So any art that humans have generated who haven't been around for very long on this planet is an interpretation of that as well. As much as AI now interprets what humans have put out there in terms of content over the years. And that is what I try to express as well. For me, like, my greatest fascination is for that original data set. And with the human mind, you can go beyond it. You can get very abstract. You can make up things and worlds. But in the end, it's always rooted in that first natural reality. We cannot fully detach from it. We can manipulate it. We can warp it and come up with new interpretations and invent new things, but they will always be tethered to that original reality. And so, in the same sense, AI is the next step in that evolution, and it is trained on this data set that was trained on the original one. It's another iteration.
So here's a question our listener Tim Floyd brought up in a comment he posted to YouTube. He's concerned that as more and more people use AI to create imagery and post it online, the AI will start learning from that created content to the point where we'll be surrounded by content that has questionable basis in reality. What are your thoughts about that?
If AI learns from other AI-generated content, that's the next iteration. And yeah, I think it does raise the question, where does that lead to? In that question, it sounds like that person was a bit worried about that evolution, and I think that's fair. But I think it's also very possible that with every iteration, the original content gets more diluted and more warped. Now we're at a stage where we have photorealistic AI imagery, but that's not all the content out there. There's also a lot of really poor images, and it's not perfect yet. And it is an art. It's like somebody like Boris puts a lot of work into that. It's really not just writing one quick prompt. And so I think if those new models are trained on data from previous models, maybe the quality is just going to get poorer and poorer. Like, I think that is also a possible scenario.
Well, we don't know yet. That is the interesting part. I think the question was for the so-called model collapse. Yeah, some people call it model autophagy disorder or Habsburg AI to show that it's a certain kind of incest leading to degeneration. It's a possibility that is going to happen when you feed an AI with the images that it has produced by itself. But because it had been on the horizon for 2 years, there are already possible strategies to avoid it. So right now, nobody knows if this is going to happen or not. Possible strategies not to have model collapse would be really to care for diverse training data, to refresh training data, or something people call augmented synthetic data. That means you have generated data, but then later you put variability into the synthetic data using natural variations in the real world. And you add controlled noise, and you do a fine-tuning and feedback loops. These mechanisms are already developed. If they work or not, I don't know. I'm not an expert in this. I'm still a person that comes from art and philosophy, but I don't know if it's going to happen or not. Let's wait and see. And yes, everything you said about human limitation to imagine something that is not connected to the world we know and the history we know has been there for a long time. The best example is imagine an alien. And imagine an alien that is not connected to anything we know. It's impossible. Yeah, I still remember some sci-fi series of the 70s where an alien was gas. That was very funny. Or an alien was a plant. Yeah, and we imagine aliens as anthropomorphic. Yeah, but different in color, different in certain design. So that limit is something that we have in our perception, and we can't get over it. So the interesting question is, will AI be able to do so? I'm not sure.
It's definitely a college dorm room kind of conversation for sure, because your imagination just runs out of steam.
I think, Boris, what you mentioned, I think it's really interesting and yet to be seen. Like, I doubt that AI is going to be able to detach from the data it was trained on any more than humans are able to detach from nature, from the original reality.
It's a form of DNA, in a
Yeah,
sense.
I would say so. Like, I have a hard time imagining it, but it will come out of left field there and surprise us all. But all that is the technological side of things. And, what you said, Boris, like these things are being addressed so that there is not this incestuous relationship between learning models and all that, That's the technological side of things. And I think what's going to be interesting to see as well is what kind of emphasis or appreciation for the arts and for creativity and content we as society put towards it. I could imagine the more AI imagery is out there, the more there will be a renewed appreciation for human-made content. The same way somebody might listen to vinyl again, and there's this counter-revolution and subculture.
Or how analog photography hasn't died off in the face of digital. There's a lot of,
Exactly.
people who are gravitating to old cameras.
Or artisanal coffee in the face of Nespresso machines.
You could also think about fashion, in a sense. If you follow fashion, I don't do it that much, but that everything old is new again. Things that you threw out because it was already 10 years old, like the next year, all of a sudden it's big again. How many times have bell bottoms and tie-dye T-shirts made a comeback? People are always rediscovering things. And I think a lot of this same kind of globules can take place in fine art and photography. We're talking about how much of this AI DNA is going to be splashing around in there, showing up in every single picture. It could very much be like fashion in a sense, where we keep getting little hints of it and splashes of it with variations of what used to be. In other words, so now we have the zipper going up the sides rather than the front, but they're still bell bottoms or something of that sort.
So the idea of everything old is new again, when Boris mentioned that subject matter of the exhibit at Arles was related to the 1960s, it just popped out at me as, that's probably what they were going for with the appeal, that's kind of an era that has a wide appeal to audiences today. And that it would be a good landing place for something that underneath is very controversial.
Yeah, nostalgia is a safe place.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yes, but I think the problem here is more severe, and I think Fred Ritchin was already talking about it, that the fakes you can generate are not about alternative realities today, but also about alternative histories. And that is going to be a problem, the manipulation. And I did like Fred's quote that we are living in a post-truth era. Yeah, and he said that a photo doesn't prove anything anymore.
Right.
And reality is what you want it to be. And here, because Miles is working in documentary and I care for documentary, I see a real problem if NGOs or whoever is generating images to show how something was, and images of events that have never been documented. They will be mistaken for the real thing. And then it always depends on the transparency. How transparent is the creator? What is actually the motivation to create those images? Yeah, what are they used for? It's something unsolved. I don't have a solution that works with AI because AI is here. AI is not going to disappear and will not be able to be controlled completely. But what we can change if we really want to work against misinformation, disinformation, is social media. We need to redesign social media. Social media is based on targeting people because of their interests, because the business model is advertising. If social media companies are forced to change the business model to subscription, we will get rid of many of the problems. because that is the engine, and AI-generated images or videos or sounds are just the petrol.
What a powerful analogy. That sort of brings the concept of the information superhighway to a whole new level.
So that said, we are going to take a short break, and we come back more about AI and what's going on with it and what we can expect and maybe not expect. And we're speaking again with Boris Eldagsen and Miles Astray. Stay tuned. Be right back.
Outshine in color with powerful RGB LED monolights from Godox. The Godox no-LED RGB M600R provides high brightness output, adjustable color temperature, millions of color options, built-in lighting effects, and a weather-resistant design. Compatibility with industry-standard Bowens accessories, as well as numerous wired and wireless control options, allow the M600R to be endlessly expanded. Affordable, durable, color-accurate, and incredibly bright, the cutting-edge LED fixtures from Godox bring power and versatility to any set. Head on over to bnh.com for more information about Godox LED monolights or use the link in our podcast show notes.
Okay, we are back, and we're already in the midst of a whole other discussion we got into during the break. And Mike, why don't you rephrase your question, and we'll take it from there.
So yeah, we were speaking about our conversation with Fred Richin, and that conversation was just manifold with really interesting ideas. One of the most mind-blowing was when he mentioned some of the prompts that he entered and the elicited responses that were generated, which were so idiosyncratic and so surprising. For instance, when he typed in a prompt such as "show me a mother feeding her children, taking care of them," it spit out an image of an orangutan with her children. And he never would have expected that. Neither would I. Similarly, a prompt was something like, "show me a group of children book writers." And it showed him a group of children who were authors and not adults who wrote children's books. And those kind of absolutely non-human idiosyncratic results really surprised him and prompted more creativity.
Yes, but that's all related to the training data and to how AI works. And the text prompts are getting better and more accurate. And what you always get, if you keep it open like this, you get a bias. Yeah, if you want a picture of a cat, you get that type of cat that was the most dominant in the training data, and that type of picture that was the most dominant in the training data. And I also remember him saying that he really liked DALL-E 2, me too, because it was so raw. But with the refinement of AI image generators, you need to add something to it, because for me, if I would prompt as open as Fred is doing it, I would get a bias, and I'm not interested in the bias.
It's interesting, Boris, that both you and Fred had that same reaction when using that earlier version of DALL-E. Let's listen quickly to what Fred had to say about that.
I was working with DALL-E for a long period of time, and there was about a 3-month period where it was extraordinary. I was getting amazing results. I was so happily surprised. And then I'd go back, and it became more and more conventional and less interesting for a certain period of time. What a lot of people try to do with prompts is to get exactly what they want. My approach is the opposite. I'm leaving latitude for the AI to make its own decisions. I don't want to say every part of the image what I want it to be. I'm just giving it a general idea.
So the takeaway that I get is that using these really modern image generators, it would be much less likely to get something surprising and creative and new.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to back up one quick second and touch on that word raw that you used earlier. In terms of rawness, last week I started seeing some eyebrow-raising generated images, especially on Twitter or X. And these were made with this new image generator called Flux, which was created by a company called Black Forest Labs. And as soon as I saw that name, I thought, okay, that's interesting. The Black Forest is in Germany. And I know someone from Germany who's into this stuff. And it turns out that Black Forest Labs is connected to our previous conversation, Boris, because it seems that some of the founders of this new company were involved in the original Lion 5B dataset and the Stable Diffusion organization. And I wanted to get your thoughts about Flux and the people involved and why you think it's become the image generator component of Elon Musk's Grok AI.
So where do I start? For those who haven't been into the Black Forest, I've been there 10 years ago. I was teaching there once a semester, and they said we have 2 winter semesters because it can be dense with the trees so that there is no sun getting into it, and the snow is going to survive until May. So I was surprised that something comes out of that area. And then when I looked at the people involved, I was not surprised anymore because Stable Diffusion has a history that is rooted in Germany. I've met Björn Ommer, professor of the university in Munich and one of the experts here, several times and could ask him about the history of Stable Diffusion. And it all started when he was teaching at the university in Heidelberg. So Robin Rombach, who is also a member of Black Forest Labs, was a student of his then. And then when Omar moved to Munich, many of his team got along and they created a foundation, a technical foundation for Stable Diffusion. And Stability AI only paid the money to connect the technical foundation that compresses the rendering time you need with an open source training data set, Lion 5B. And Lion is a non-profit organization based in Hamburg. And that needed to be trained, and the rendering money that was paid by Stability AI. So some of that team then moved over to Stability AI, worked for Stability AI. And as we all know, in the last year, that company kind of collapsed. And because of the CEO that was forced to leave. And so the people that we are talking about now already left earlier this year or last year. I don't know the right timeline. But they joined forces now. They created a new thing. So where do they come from? They know the open source model from scratch because they just created it and they worked for Stability. And their background is open source. And the open source model has no censorship. It's open. Yeah, it can be used by anyone that has downloaded it on a computer in whatever way you want. When it came out, I was surprised, and then I was really thrilled and excited. And for 2 weeks, I'm playing around with the model and did several tests. And yes, it is uncensored, like Stable Diffusion was. And it is very convincing if you look at the quality of the people depicted. The hands are nearly perfect. Many people are writing it's the Mid-Journey killer. And it is great. It's very promising. They also announced a video model that has not been released yet. They have some weaknesses. So it's very hard to work with references of art history. It's much easier to generate well-known VIPs. And I'm not surprised that they team up with Elon Musk and X and Grok because of the people who founded Black Forest Labs, and also because the history they have. Yeah, it's open source.
So they're aligned in that dimension of uncensored, free speech absolutists.
The big platforms are all censored. The open source model was never censored, and the people from Lion said, yes, we have all kinds of images in our training data, images you don't like, because it needs to be in there for the AI to understand these kinds of images, to be able, if you want to filter them out.
Mhm.
So that could be a technical reason why censorship in a training data is possibly not a good thing. And you also had a representative of Black Forest Labs comparing the images of Google that created very strange versions of Greek philosophers and American Civil War and World War II soldiers that were just too balanced.
Well, historically inaccurate, let's say.
Historically inaccurate with what Black Forest can do now. For me, Black Forest is one of those surprises that AI is full of. At a certain moment, there is a new company, not with new people, but with a new approach, or they have learned from the old companies and they do something better. And then suddenly you have a new player.
Now, Boris, let's just touch on the concept of guardrails and censorship. On the pro-guardrail side, they would point to the fact that since this Flux model was released, there have been literally thousands of violent, character-assassinated, real divisive prankster images. A lot of garbage was coming out of that. And probably they would speak to the fact that approximately 0 images were created in the opposite direction, a sense of using the lack of guardrails as a means of expressive creativity. And so it seems like there's a selected group of people who would want to use a non-guardrailed generator, and other people might point to as being bad actors. And so how do you defend that?
You could generate those images already with any kind of stable diffusion model, not as good, but now it has a different quality. And it's really bad for the American elections. There was a reason why Midjourney and OpenAI made it impossible to generate images of Donald Trump and Biden or now Harris. And then you have suddenly Elon Musk having a 2-hour blah blah with Donald Trump and now releasing this model. I think by releasing this model, he is actively enabling all of those fake images of the candidates to be generated and to be spread. And my guess is that the team Trump is going to do it more often than the team Harris.
Well, there was actually a photograph released right after this program was accessible, and one of the first shots that a prankster put out there was a shot of Musk and Trump locking faces in a real hearty kiss together.
Thanks for that picture.
And by the way, that picture was obviously fake. I mean, it looked like an illustration. It didn't fool me for a moment, but the possibilities are there. We know it.
But let's talk about the other side of the argument for the lack of guardrails. Aside from the problems that Gemini and Imagen suffered with historical inaccuracies, what are the real benefits that you've seen, Boris, in your work? How does a lack of guardrails help your creativity?
Well, I don't need to invent workarounds, which I always did and always could, but it costs more time. Yeah, all of those guardrails and forms of censorship you can get around. If you invest time and creativity there, you will find solutions. And sometimes just by accident, like 6 weeks ago by accident, I happened to find a way to surpass censorship in Midjourney by a mix of different tools and features. And suddenly I can generate images that possibly in the past I would never get. And these are just bugs. They happen. And if I talk too much about this bug, it's going to disappear.
But it's just us talking. So you can let us... No, it's just us. We won't say anything.
So don't send me emails. Don't ask me how I did it. I'm not going to respond.
But Boris, if it's possible, can you talk to a specific piece of art that you made where you felt that the guardrails were preventing your creativity from being fully expressed easily?
Well, I created recently an image which is like Adam and Eve creating the snake. And that version it's a clay snake. Yeah, they are like potters. Yeah, they are inventing it by themselves. And of course, if you have Adam and Eve, they don't wear jeans. Yeah, it's Garden of Eden. Yeah, there is no cheese
Are the
shop.
fig leaves there?
Yes. So that is something that in the past is just annoying. If you want to use a generator that is censored, you just generate them and then they wear something. And then you take the image and you go to a Nudify app and then you remove whatever they wear. And then you have a difference in quality because it's not just one generator that did it. And then you go to Magnific and do an upscaling, and then the quality becomes one again. So these are possible workarounds. But really annoying for me is Photoshop. That is really restrictive with in-painting, out-painting. And I would prefer that Photoshop is doing a grown-up adult version where you have an age check. Yeah, and then you can generate Adam and Eve if you want
Gotcha.
to.
So by the age check, you mean for individual users?
Yes.
Right.
You know, by the way, just on an Adam and Eve thing, they always refer to, the apple, Eve eating the apple, and that was the beginning of the problems. But I read recently, it was an interesting little note that it wasn't really the apple that caused the problem. It's when she ate the mushrooms and then the snake started talking to her. That's when things started going south. Just an interesting note.
This is a new one for me. I love. No, really, it's one of my hobbies that I'm collecting different interpretations about that old biblical story, and there are many. But this one with the mushroom is a new one.
There's a whole new series for you, Boris.
There you go.
Yeah. New York style.
One last thing regarding Black Forest Labs and Flux. I didn't see Christoph Schumann's name involved with Flux, and I thought that was kind of interesting. We talked about Schumann in our previous conversation. Isn't he the head of the group of researchers who created the Lion 5B dataset?
Well, he is, because it's a non-profit organization, it's like a club, yeah, and so they need to have an official representative and a head that is elected. What I know from a couple of podcasts that I heard with them in German is it's a diverse group of nerds.
Yeah.
They found themselves on Discord and they put the training data together in their private time. They're not making money with it. And they did it for a good cause because they said it's happening. Yeah, there is another level of quality of training possible, and we don't want the big companies to decide upon the bias. So we need an open source model to balance it out. And even if you go back to the 80s, I was talking to an old computer scientist telling me that in the 80s, when they had conferences about artificial intelligence, they discussed what needs to happen for an AI to become an agent of its own and how can this be balanced out. And also one of the theories was that you need to have many competing. There shouldn't be one dominant, gaining world power. There need to be a variety of AIs, and that competition is also a kind of control. But these are just informations I get from conversations with the real experts. It's not my field of expertise, but maybe we go to Miles again, because Miles had been working in documentary for a long time. And I think there is a threat to documentary coming from artificial intelligence. And my question would be, do you think so as well? Is there something that changes in your profession that has been changing during the last 2 years?
I think there is definitely a threat there, not to me personally, but when we're talking about misinformation, like I've mentioned this before, to me, AI is really a weapon of mass misinformation in the hands of the wrong people. We touched on politics briefly earlier, and you mentioned an important thing there, Boris. It is one side that is leveraging that technology more so than the other in a country like the US. So that creates an imbalance that is very dangerous, especially when we're talking about upcoming elections. And we already see it happening. And so I think documentary photography, to circle back to your question, it has such a crucial role in all that in terms of how it depicts realities and verifiable events that actually happened or did not happen. And you mentioned that earlier as well, Boris. Like you said, we need to put guardrails in place when we're talking about social media. And I think that's a very good point. And it is something that occurred to me recently, even though it's actually very obvious. But like, I still have absolutely no trust issues when I look at major news outlets, like the kind of news outlets where I get my information. I have absolutely no doubt that the imagery I'm seeing are actual photographs. Whereas if I scroll down my social media feed, I don't trust anything anymore. So there's a huge difference there. And of course, social media is not a reputable news source, but a lot of young people are using it that way. You know, they might not get their information from anywhere else anymore. And so I think when we're talking about guardrails, it's also not just tagging AI imagery, for example, like the technical aspect of all that. I think it's also education. Education plays a huge role in that. I think we have new generations that grow up inside that new digital landscape, that new digital normal.
It's a void that they're growing up in, actually, because the places they're getting their news are basically building algorithms saying, okay, here's what this person likes to read about. And they're not showing you, me, or anybody else other articles that we might find interesting that could expand our horizons and maybe have us see from different perspectives. But instead, we're just reading stuff that will make us happy. We're only contacting people who we agree with, and everything is good in the world.
Exactly.
I think it's interesting that, Miles, you brought up the idea of social media being looked at as a source of news. But Boris, earlier in our conversation, you referenced social media as being basically advertising. I mean, there are aspects of both.
That's exactly the issue, you know, because underneath it is what Boris is saying. It's a business-driven, stakeholder-driven advertising model. But like, that's not what it feels like to you as a user if you're not questioning, you know, especially as a young person. So you might just take it at face value, whatever you see there. And that's why I'm saying, like, I think we really need to educate young people and how to navigate this new digital landscape, because they don't really have much of a reference point to earlier times where you could just rely on things that you would see to a certain degree. You know, we've said it earlier, like, I mean, there has been manipulation since the dawn of photography, but like, it was difficult to do that. And now it's very easy to just mass produce false content, false information. And so I think we really need to educate young people and make them questioning human beings that don't just take things at face value, because we cannot indulge that luxury anymore.
I don't think it's just limited to young people.
Oh, no, absolutely. They might actually be more savvy with that. That is true. But I think they're growing up in this time without any frame of reference. And so I think it's important for them to kind of like know what's happening there.
I would like to add something to social media. As you know, I studied fine arts and philosophy, and I finished at the end of the 90s. And then the internet was just young, and I got in sideways. And I became a community manager and then later a strategist. And I was working for 20 years as a freelancer to finance my art as a social media marketing expert. And so I know how it works. And social media is not made for us to become better people. It's a business. It's a business model that is based on targeting certain groups, any group of people that you want, better than in the past. Yeah, when you only had like TV or magazines, there's a certain amount of information you had about the people watching a certain show or reading a certain paper. And with social media, you have so much more information, anything people just post. And this allows the companies to target those people and to give them certain information. And also the algorithms are tailored. And we have echo chambers. Everybody is living in his, her bubble. It is a problem. Without social media, I think Brexit would possibly not have happened. And the same might have been with the election of Trump. Yeah, also Obama was the first that was social media powered. So these things are powerful tools. And I think after 20, 25 years of just letting them do whatever they want to, in democracies, we need to redesign it. We need to get rid of all the potential of disinformation, and there's a lot in it. So one thing is the business model. The second thing is the sharing option. All of this can change. I was in Canada for the first time in May for talks and exhibitions, and I wanted to share articles in Facebook, and I couldn't. Suddenly, I got a message telling me that in Canada, it's not possible to share articles from newspapers because there is a fight between Meta and Canadian state. The Canadian state wants that people who generate a certain content, who generate news, get also a certain percentage of money. And because Meta doesn't want to pay, you can't do it. So these things can be turned on and off. That is no problem. And if we look at the quality of information we get in social media, it is rubbish because the high quality press is all locked behind a paywall. And if you are not willing to subscribe to one of those papers, magazines, and so on, you get the low quality content. And then there are some in between that try to live in both worlds, but then they need to come up with stupid headlines telling you the 10 scariest things that can happen to you in New York. And then you click on it, clickbait, and then you will find something that you didn't expect, didn't want to read, and you will not do it a second time. So this is all part of the problem, and it needs to be solved from different sides. But I don't see a conversation happening about this.
Yeah. I think it's a vicious cycle in a way because the print magazines and news outlets, that's a dying industry. So they need to compete online and they need to make money to survive. So either they need to hide behind that paywall that you mentioned, or they need to put out those clickbait headlines to compete with others and with social media. And so, of course, that is detrimental for the quality of real journalism. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that is a huge problem. And that's what makes it so easy for false information and really rubbish content to spread so easily on social media.
I think what media needs to be aware of is that they can lose more and more trust because of AI and them not really making transparent how they use AI-generated text, headlines, and images. And I mentioned it last year. In Germany, we have an umbrella organization of all professional photographers. And we managed, after 1 year of planning, to get a private Zoom workshop with the majority of picture editors in Germany across the different publishers, just to talk about that problem, because their business is trust. Yeah, if a normal picture editor is working with people like Miles, it's an established relationship for years. So I trust you that you deliver the authentic photography and not invent something that never happened. But what is the perspective of the readers? How do I maintain trust? And what I realized talking with many of those picture editors in the last 1.5 years is publishers have guidelines, but often they are just for themselves. They are not communicated to their audience because they think, it's all in flux and it can change tomorrow. So why should we publish something today that next week might be differently? But I think it's a mistake. And what we are trying to achieve in Germany is to come up with ideas and solutions for transparency that are then shared across the nation. And that would be a big effort, to come up with a certain way to create a labeling that something is authentic, manipulated, or generated.
So in the United States, I've noticed that more and more websites are instituting their own fact-checking, especially with news items related to the upcoming elections. So on Twitter or X, you can see community notes, which show up on posts that others have flagged as deliberate misinformation. And these notes have links to high-grade news sources that provide more evidence. And this generally works well. I mean, at least in flagging the biggest offenders pretty quickly. So under Twitter's new, quote, free speech absolutist mandate, you can post misinformation, and people do, but it can be tagged as such. It's kind of like Wikipedia's approach. And on news aggregators like Google News, items floating around in the online discourse, especially political headlines, that are factually incorrect will be flagged and tagged as false. And they typically use sources like Snopes.com and PoliticalFact.com to check these. And then finally, I noticed, at least on Newsweek.com, but maybe there are others, there's a fairness meter to let readers describe their subjective response to an article as it pertains to the left-right political spectrum. And I really like seeing all of these options. I mean, I like seeing this stuff come up naturally when I go to a website. It feels like it's a response or like a reckoning that's being had within the online news purveyor community, even though I recognize that social media in general needs a more extensive overhaul.
On another note, in terms of misinformation and disinformation, what about the systems that are in place for running images through to identify whether it's a simulated image? How effective are they? How often are they used? Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
To be honest, I think they're not effective enough yet. And I think they're still very easy to circumvent. The main issue that I see is there is no unilateral legislation or anything regulating that. Along the lines of what Boris just mentioned, what they're trying to do in Germany, to come up with some universal rules. Because right now, it's just kind of like unilateral and half-hearted efforts of companies like Meta to implement their own guardrails there.
I don't know, Miles. I mean, personally, I have a hard time believing that there's going to be anything like a system-wide regulation in the United States along the lines of what you were describing. But back to Jill's point for a moment, I'm curious, in your opinion, Boris, is it even hypothetically possible that a universal image checker could be produced? For example, like a website that could easily, quickly, and very reliably analyze any image and ascertain whether or not it's been generated.
I don't think so.
I thought you'd say that. Okay.
Working 20 years in social media, I have seen the problem with fake accounts. And it is always a fight where the bad guys are finding a new loophole, and then the good guys try to fix it, and then there's a new loophole, and so it continues. And I expect this to happen with AI images as well. You have several tools. They give you a certain percentage. They estimate if an image is generated or not. But if you use 10 tools, you get 10 different results. And then where do you draw the line? Yeah. Is 60% authentic enough? And what if a second tool is telling me it's 70% authentic or generated, and they are contradicting each other? It's unfortunately not a solution, but people are looking for technical solutions. And in Europe, we have the European AI Act, and they want things to be transparent. and we don't know yet. Yeah, so they established an office to figure this out that started to work in July. It's going to take some time until they come up with propositions. The same time, going back to 2019, you have initiatives coming out of the United States, like the Content Authenticity Initiative, CAI, that was founded 2019 by Adobe, New York Times, Twitter. Yeah. They wanted to promote a new standard of authenticity, and they created an offspring that more people might know. It's the C2PA. And that's, I think, founded 21, and it's called the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And that started with Adobe, BBC, Intel, Microsoft, others, and now you have also Google, Sony, and more join. I think that is an attempt to embed the source of a certain image into the file. But again, it's not waterproof. You do a screenshot, and what happens then? So some people come up with watermarks that are invisible to us, and that is a certain structure of the pixels. But what happens if I alter that image and I do a little bit of in-painting and 30% of the image is looking differently? Then a watermark that is embedded in the pixels doesn't work as well. So I don't know. Solutions need to come from all sides, and we are still in the process. And the AI automobile or spaceship is continuously accelerating.
Yeah, it's kind of like an app picture that of like cops and robbers, and it's like this chase, and one is trying to regulate and the other one is trying to find those loopholes and everything. And that's always going to be the case with crime, with misinformation, with all that. And we'll never get to a utopian state where that's not the case. A person with nefarious intent will always find a workaround. I think the problem right now is the scale of it. Like I said earlier, manipulation of images has been taking place forever, but you needed a certain skill set to do it. So there were very few people who could do it. And then there were enough people to call out those fakes and debunk them. And right now, this has shifted tectonically. Anybody can do this and can do it from scratch. And there are not enough people to keep up with it. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make. I mean, there will always be workarounds. There will always be ways to circumvent those kind of regulations. But like right now, we're just tremendously lagging behind. And I think we need to catch up.
Yeah. I think that it's going to be a bottom-up type of solution. In fact, Stephen Shanklin, I think, made a pretty good argument, an optimistic look and take at dealing with manipulated images, disinformation in general, a real general kind of statement. Take a listen.
I think you have to look at one point here, which is that you're never going to get something that's perfect. With sufficient skill and money, you're going to be able to, crack or break or fake anything. But if the obstacles get high enough, it will, in effect, deter, malfeasance. So even if a solution isn't perfect, I think, especially if it's done in combination with 16 other things and a certain amount of social norms and expectations over here, and something in class when you're in 5th grade over there, and a news story you read about warning of this over here, and content credentials over there. You pile all these things on top of each other, and you get maybe not a perfect regime for ensuring when you can trust photos, but you get a good enough system where it's just hard enough to do it, and people are just prepped enough that that they should be on the alert for fakery, that you actually get a system where you don't completely lose all trust in photos.
When I was thinking about that, as he was saying it and then later, it just felt kind of true to me, and it's how I sort of think of things today. Like when I see deepfake images, they're deepfake images. Those are just sort of gags, goofs. They don't seem to gain traction.
I don't know. It depends on how clever you actually do it. It's a strategy. In May, I generated my own avatar with HeyGen, And I trained it on a 2-minute video of me sitting where I'm sitting now. And 4 days I didn't shave. So I wanted to have, not a real proper face. No, I wanted to see how many of those details are learned by the AI. What about the reflection in my glasses of my light? And the result was amazing. It was me, sitting in front of the same wallpaper, being not shaved in a suit, reflection of light in the glasses. And the voice was me as well. The only thing that changed was that the harsh German accent I'm having now was gone. And then I posted that video in social media and I asked my followers, guess, is it real me or not? And I was really playing with their minds because my avatar was asking them, is it possible to generate an avatar of me that is so detailed, that can show you my unshaved chin, that can show you the reflections of light? And 2/3 believed that it was me. And even like friends that I'm speaking English with, they completely forgot that my English was much, much better than in the past. And as a result, many were shocked how good it actually was. But that was May, and now it's August. It's going to continue. And as I said before, it's just about the strategy, how you create something, how you plant it, how you line it up.
Yeah, one of the things that, in fact, I mentioned on the last show that a couple of weeks ago, the New York Times, in an article on AI, they published 8 photographs. 4 of them were real and 4 of them were fake. And they asked you, which ones do you think are which? And I got 2 and 2. And the ones I got wrong were the ones I could have sworn I had right. It was very unsettling, but it really shook me that I got half of them wrong. And I really thought that I know better than this because I play with the stuff. I should know better. It got me, it fooled me, literally 50% of the time.
Yeah, I think that's why it's really important that it is a mix of things coming together when we're talking about guardrails. Like, I think it's not any one actor's sole responsibility. It's not just the government. It's not just the private sector. It's not just the individual citizen. They all need to act together to make progress there, because I do think it is an individual responsibility to question a picture. But, you have a critical eye and you were off by 50%. And so even if you are critical, it might still be impossible for you to really tell what's what. In that case, we need a certain label there or any kind of indication to help along. But it's really all those things coming together. I think it's educating people on like how to spot those things or how to just be critical in general and question what they see. And also it depends a lot on what kind of content we're talking, because it's one thing to mistake a picture in a quiz. It's another thing to mistake a picture that is published on the front page of the New York Times
as being credible. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a huge difference there. And one thing is a lull, and another thing is a very, very dangerous piece of misinformation. And so, I think we need to come together. Different actors need to come together to mitigate those risks. I think we really need to define what we as a society value as real and human created content.
Yeah, definitely. I can't think of anything more hopeful than that.
Miles and Boris, we could be going over this information forever. And next week it'll be a whole new story anyway. So we could probably get together once a week and have a whole new show with updates. But aside from that, Boris, what do you have coming down the pike? Any new projects that you're working on you want to share with us?
Well, I continuously explore what's possible. I've done a lot of moving images with AI recently, and I've shown a lot of my work all around the globe. Like July was crazy. I had work in shows parallel that was like from Montreal to Paris and Bangkok and Berlin.
See, that's where schizophrenia comes in handy.
Yes, definitely. So I'm still can't predict what's going to happen with me, with AI, with the development. I'm constantly surprised. I'm invited continuously as somebody who is teaching workshops, doing lectures and panel talks. Next week, I'm flying to Buenos Aires for the German Cultural Institute Goethe. So that's what I'm doing.
Boris, for any of our listeners would like to see your work, where can they go
My
to?
artwork is on eldagsen.com. And if you are interested in what I do in talks and teachings, it's promptwhispering.ai. And Instagram, you get updates.
The links for these will be in our show notes, so our listeners can catch up to you.
Thanks. Instagram is the easiest to stay updated of what I do.
Okay. And that link will be there too. Miles, what about yourself? Upcoming projects?
Yeah. Currently, my main objective is to take Flamingone back into the real world and organize some exhibitions. Since I'm currently based here in La Paz, Bolivia, that's going to be the first stop. Inauguration is on Tuesday at an art gallery here, alongside some other works of a series that I call Can't Make That Up.
That's an interesting name. I like that.
So, yeah, a couple of works that are not necessarily like visually in the same style of Flamingone, but like they share an aspect of surrealism. And yeah, I think they all kind of raise the question, or could potentially raise the question, is this real or not? And interestingly, for example, one of the things that happens with AI, we always talk about the hands and how they're not really well done. And quite a few of those pictures, which are all real pictures, of course, have such kind of like flawed looking hands as well, but just like for natural reasons. So yeah, I think it's an interesting exhibition, and I'm in touch with galleries and institutions throughout Latin America. That was kind of like my first stop now. So I'm talking to people in Mexico City and Buenos Aires and Montevideo, a couple of different places. And then I want to continue towards North America and Europe. And so that's kind of the main thing right now. And then I have a book in the pipeline. I'm looking for a publisher or an agent as a first step to get into the big publishing houses. So this has nothing to do with photography. This is purely writing. A book that I wrote a while back, which is actually also about refugees, is kind of like the underlying theme there. And so that is something I'm trying to get published. Those are my main projects right now.
And if our listeners would like to catch up on your work firsthand, links are?
That would be milesastray.com or Miles Astray across social media on Instagram mostly, and Facebook. It would be Miles Astray.
And we will have those links again in our show notes for our listeners to click on and catch up more on both of your work. Boris and Miles, thank you very much for being with us today, for giving us your thoughts on very complex subjects. And nobody's got it right, and nobody's got 100% of it, because, again, while we've been sitting here talking for almost 2 hours, new things have probably come out. We go back online, we'll find out that a whole new thing happened that we could have talked about. But again, that'll be for another day. So again, in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure. Now, if you are a fan of the show but not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H Photos YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts, and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog, where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast Group, where you can share your favorite photos and comments about the show. I'm your host, Alan Weitz. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein, and our executive producer is Richard Stevens. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much for tuning in today.
Thanks to Godox for sponsoring this week's episode.